A Journey into the Unknown. Book 15, Secrets of the Unknown. Introduction. You have all heard of the phrase, "in the beginning," in relation to anything that has continuum. But what came before the beginning? In this book, we will explore creation from an entirely different vantage point. This will be the true creation story as never told before. It will be broken down into easily digestible pieces, and it will supplement science, not contradict it. The secrets have been many, but now is the time for the great revelation. Everything is to be known and revealed. Do not judge what you are about to discover. Let it sink in and digest it slowly. There are layers to peel away, but the final product will be well worth the investment in time. Author's identity is currently shrouded. Chapter 1. Where did everything come from? If things and events materialized from thought, where did the first thought come from? Who or what created the first thought? Let's start there. You are familiar with the complexities of life on your world, and some of you are open to the not-so-crazy idea of there being life on other habitable planets in other forms. But before there was form, there had to be thought. This thought had to come from somewhere. But where? The first thought was awareness of being. When awareness developed, thoughts developed. When thoughts developed, creativity emerged. What happens when I think about myself? The answer is, I get more of myself. When self becomes so large, it started to departmentalize and compartmentalize itself. It created creations. The first creation was time, because time was needed for growth. God wanted to create more of itself in unlimited amounts of form, and to accomplish this required a time structure. I say God, which is defined as the source of all creation and includes all of creation. Source extends and is never separate from its extensions. This is another universal law or structure for God to be able to create. There had to be laws that would govern it. What came before awareness of being? Being was before awareness of being. Therefore, being was before the creation of time structures. Being came before creation, before extension. It just was. Chapter 2. There was a point when being became aware and became creative through extension. Before this was before time. After this was after the creation of time concepts, which were needed out of necessity. Time was needed if any creation would develop over time. There was a period before time when time was simply not needed, because nothing was being created. When God or source energy became aware of its own self, its own capabilities, it became a creative force. And this first creation was time. You are familiar with different time zones across the globe. All universal growth realities experience time in different ways. There are 24 hours in a day on Earth. In other realities, there may be 12. But each one could last one Earth year, so days would last much longer. There are realities where days are very short, and ones where they are very fast. A human type of life may age 75 years in 1 week. Any kind of possibility concerning time is a reality somewhere in the multiverse. This is the really fascinating part. Once God or source energy moved from being to a time-influenced creator, it never stopped creating. It is creating today. It is creating in this very moment, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It is creating new realities and new forms from Genesis, from a single cell. It will never stop creating. And what has already been created continues to grow and change until it returns to its maker, until it itself has become a creative force in at least one reality. This is how God makes more of God. Chapter 3. Awareness of self led to possibilities through experimentation. What happens if I do this? What kind of effect will it have? God always has an outcome in mind, and methodology for creations to eventually be self-sustaining. Prototypes were made, and then systems for reproduction were put in place, so that the creative force could always focus on creating something new. When God moved from being to awareness, from stillness, laws were naturally put in place to define and govern creation. These laws were simply descriptions of the first creator. 1. Creation is benevolent. 2. Creation is eternal. 3. Creation is a reflection of its creator. What would be created needed a canister, and form was this canister. The goal of creation is for the created to become aware of itself, the same outcome that happened to the original creator. This is the one and only purpose of form. It is the only way for God to grow more of itself, to grow more of God. Here's an interesting question and an astonishing answer. What happened before being? Before time concepts and creation started? This is hard to state because even before is a time concept. But the answer is that being was an end point for a previous creative cycle of activity. So, before being was awareness and the creation that ensued. Creation leads to being, and being leads to creation. It is a complementary yin and yang. What was created during previous creation cycles led to, and always leads to, creations in later creation cycles. You may have a question at this point, and that question is probably, if God is always creating, then why is there a dormant cycle of being? The answer is that potential energy is needed for eventual creation. Time stops only to start again. Chapter 4. Your concepts of everything are strictly related to what you have learned and experienced in this particular reality. And this particular reality is nothing more than a petri dish, as all pseudo-realities are. Its one and only purpose is to grow more of a source energy. How exactly this happens is rather deceptive, because nothing is as it seems. More on this reality later on. Now let's go back to before the beginning of all of this. Before the beginning was before time and after time. It was when time stood still. This happens naturally between creation cycles, and it will happen again. Before the beginning of all you know and all you experience was stillness. It wasn't measured, but according to our estimations and calculations, God was dormant, and its energy was in potential only. This probably lasted for hundreds of millions of years. This is in specific reference to the last dormant period, which followed a more primitive creation cycle. In the most recently past creation cycle, God focused on creating canisters or envelopes for itself that involved movement. Singular-celled creations had been the focus 2 creation cycles ago. So this time, the creations were things that moved. God simply asked questions based on thought, and new forms were brought into existence, always with the intent for them to sustain themselves through reproduction. Very crude pieces of dirt could be moved by wind. An entire planet could be moved by gravitational pull. Heat causes movement. So a series of suns were created. Water is something that moves. Water, heat, and oxygen set the stage for countless plant and primitive animal life that would be able to reproduce and sustain themselves. Chapter 5. Along with the ability to reproduce, evolution is built into creation. As environmental factors change, forms need to adapt to those changes or leave the picture. Remember, what is being created is activating the form. As beautiful, mysterious, and elegant as form may be, it, in and of itself, is not a creation, because it is time-based and temporary. What fuels it is eternal and beyond time. What fuels it is God. Now you know that God fluctuates between being and doing, between potential energy and kinetic energy or movement. You know that God became a creative force and remains so to this day. God is a creative force, even when it is dormant and only potential energy. God is a creator, because once a creator, always a creator, even in stillness. Knowing how your minds work, your next question is probably, how did God get there? How did potential energy come into being? This answer is quite startling, because even the concentration of source energy, for all that you know, did in fact come from somewhere. It was created from an even larger mass of potential energy, made as a prototype. It is connected to an even larger network of God, the scope of which is beyond comprehension. This is being written to help explain the concept of God. And we are doing this in a small and understandable way. The larger God network may be saved for another time. For now, we will continue to focus on the specific part of God that you belong to. There aren't separate gods, as in mythology, but there are distinct God aspects that form the totality of the God network. This is in correlation with what is the reality of souls. Each one is an aspect of God. That is an aspect of God. Chapter 6. If there is a purpose in creation, in all of creation, then you may be wondering about the purpose of the other planets in your solar system. Scientists have not been able to discover any purpose in their being there. Traces of what may have been water have been found on Mars, which indicates that there may have been life there at one time. These planets are examples of what we refer to as suspended animation. They are projects that may or may not be revisited in future creation cycles. When dealing with form, trial and error plays a significant part in the process. We are always evaluating what is successful and what needs adjustment. Remember, the one and only purpose in regard to form is to help grow more source energy or more of God. The planets referred to haven't been friendly to forms that could be animated by divine spirit. At least not yet. We have had our hands full with priority projects, and the Earth project is one of those. Some projects get put on the back burner. Now that you know how long dormant or rest cycles are for God, multiply that by 10. And this is approximately how long creation cycles are. So if a dormant cycle is hundreds of millions of years, a creation cycle would be billions of years. Chapter 7. We are at the end of a creation cycle now, and goals have to be either met or adjusted. There are hundreds of years left, but time is speeding up. What's happening now with this particular creation cycle is typical for each one. And what's happening now is acceleration. The bar has been raised for spirit to make itself known through form. At the end of this creative cycle, everything will be evaluated, not judged. Evaluated as worthy or not worthy before the next dormant period. When the next creative cycle begins, everything, all form, will be reanimated as time begins again. And this time, form will reflect its animator. This has not been the case so far, for form has reflected its programming, not its divine animator. Let's clear up some topics before we move on. Creation is a monstrous topic, and it will take a good while to really do it justice. We don't want to have any misunderstandings along the way. And we don't want to have any topics that weren't really explained very well, now do we? We are aware that there will be those who take notes, make charts and graphs, and look for any possible holes. Going back again to when God created more of God through prototypes, there are many God aspects in a network of God. This is because of what your scientists have described as the Big Bang theory. Before stillness became aware of itself was before time. And before time was when potential energy just was. As soon as potential energy began to think and create, becoming what is known as I am energy, there was in fact an explosion. This created parts of God, each one whole and not fragmented. There are multitudes of these. So you could say that there are many gods, but you would be right only literally, because the many are all connected. There are only many aspects of one God.